Astronauts land on Mars hoping to colonize it, but find that this isn't the first time Mars has had people on it. A party is being thrown for astronauts who will be departing on a mission to Mars the next day. There is Nicholas the bad boy who is trying to get laid one last time before leaving. Woody and Blake, the only married couple going on the mission together. Sergei and Renee, the foreign astronauts. And Phil and Luke. They will be going in 2 teams. Luke is waiting on another astronaut named Jim to come to the party. His wife tells him to go talk to his son Bobby before leaving. Luke talks to Bobby, who says that he will miss Luke, and asks who will read to him while Luke is gone. Luke says that he will be reading the same book in space every night that Bobby will read, and in a way they will read the book together. Jim arrives and joins the party, and everyone is happy to see him. After the party, Jim, Woody, and Luke are having a good time when Jim mentions a woman named Maggie, and everyone becomes really sad. A conversation between Jim and Luke reveals that Maggie was Jim's wife, and also an astronaut. Jim and Maggie dreamt of going to Mars and spent all their lives working towards it. However, when the time came, Maggie fell ill, and Jim withdrew from the Mars program to take care of her. Maggie eventually passed away. Luke says that Jim and Maggie deserve to go to Mars more than anyone, and he is upset that they won't get to. Jim says it's okay, but when Luke leaves, it's clear that he is upset as well. 13 months later, the team of Luke, Renee, Sergei, and Nick has reached Mars. One of their rovers has spotted an unusual mountain, and upon analysis, they notice that the mountain has a shiny top. They assume that it's ice, and underneath the mountain could be a whole water reserve. They send the message to World Space Station, where Woody, Terry, Phil, and Jim are present. They let the station know that they will be heading out to explore the unusual mountain. As Luke and the crew reach the mountain, they hear a strange signal in their headsets. They use a radio wave radar to study the mountain, and the readings say that the mountain is metal underneath the dust, not ice. Luke says there must be a mistake, and tells them to move the radar closer and use more power to get an accurate reading. As they do that, an intense energy pulse comes out of the mountain, and all their instruments stop working. Then, a tornado starts forming that sucks everything in. The tornado moves like a sentient being. It sucks in and kills Sergei, Renee, and Nick, but Luke survives. After the tornado settles, a giant metal face is revealed where the mountain was. Back on the World Space Station, an emergency meeting is called because the intense energy pulse from Mars has been detected, and after that, nearly all transmissions have been lost. A video transmission is received that barely works, but shows a very injured Luke conveying that everyone on his team is dead, and something attacked them. Woody tries to convince the captain of the World Space Station to send a rescue mission for Luke, but the captain says that Luke might already be dead, and they have no way of knowing if going to Mars is safe, because all the transmissions have stopped. Phil says they can get information transmitted from one of the Saturn probes flying close to Mars and plan their mission accordingly, and the captain agrees. Woody tells the captain that the mission will only work if Jim flies the ship because he has spent the most time training to go to Mars, and him and Maggie were the ones who designed all the Mars mission plans. Captain is reluctant at first, but eventually agrees. Several months later, the crew of Jim, Woody, Terry, and Phil is nearing Mars. Phil is making DNA out of candies, and Jim arrives and eats his candy. Woody tells Jim that the Saturn probe will be flying close to Mars in a few hours, giving them the information they need to land. The Saturn probe shows images of 3 graves near the base camp of the previous team. Phil thinks this means that Luke is alive, but Terry says it just means there was no one left to bury him. They look at the site where the energy pulse came from, and it is still emitting the same pulse. They think it's a problem with the probe. As they are preparing to enter Mars, micrometeoroids start hitting their ship and create holes where the air starts leaking from. Woody seals up the holes from the inside and the outside with the help of the team, but they are not aware that the meteoroids have also damaged their fuel tanks. As they begin their launch into Mars's atmosphere, fuel leaks out, and when they fire the engine, there is an explosion destroying their ship. They have no choice but to get out into space in just their suits, tethered to each other. They aim for a refueling module in orbit around Mars from the previous missions. It's farther away from them than they calculated, so Woody decides that he will take a grappling gun wire, use all the fuel in his jetpack, and fly full speed at the refueling module, tying the wire to it. This will give the rest of the gang a chance to reach the module safely. He attempts the maneuver and manages to tie the wire, but overshoots himself and is left stranded in space with no fuel in his jetpack. Terry is devastated and says they have to rescue Woody, but Jim and Woody both know it's impossible because none of them have enough fuel in their jetpacks. Terry attempts the rescue anyway, but Woody tells her to stop and go back before she runs out of fuel and is stranded too. She attempts to bring Woody back using the grappling gun, but the wire is just a little too short to reach him. Terry says she is going to get closer and try and again. Woody realizes she will kill herself trying to rescue him, so he removes his helmet and sacrifices himself so she stops. Jim, Terry, and Phil manage to land the refueling module on Mars. They reach the base camp of the previous mission. They find most of the equipment damaged but still repairable, which means they can go back home with it. Jim finds that plants are growing in the experimental greenhouse and is shocked by this. Luke appears behind Jim and attacks him. Luke is in very bad shape and thinks Jim is a hallucination, but Jim convinces him this is reality by telling him that he is reading a book that his son Bobby is also reading back on Earth. Luke calms down. He tells them how he survived by growing plants in the greenhouse for a year. He tells them about the incident that killed the rest of the team. Instead of saying he survived, he says he was spared and it was for a reason. He says he was spared to figure out the secret. Jim asks Luke what secret he is talking about, and Luke shows them a picture of the giant metal face. Turns out it is the famous face on Mars, which was previously viewed from satellites, but was assumed to just be a mountain. Luke says that it was placed there by someone for them to see. Jim asks about the signal Luke's team heard when they were close to the face. Luke explains that he has been analyzing the signal for a year, and he's figured out that the pattern of the signal in physical dimensions made the picture of a DNA. He says it's a self-portrait from the beings that placed the face there, a declaration of their identity, a signature. Terry notices that the last pair of chromosomes is missing from the DNA, so it's not human. Later, as they are packing for the journey home, Jim spills some candies, which makes him remember his conversation with Phil. He realizes the DNA picture is not a signature, it's a test. The beings want them to fill in the last pair of chromosomes to prove that they are human. The face attacked Luke's team because the radio waves from their radar were interpreted as the wrong answer to the test. Jim says they need to reconfigure the radio waves from the radar to give the right answer, filling the last 2 chromosomes. The rest of the team are hesitant, but Jim convinces them that if they don't do this, the whole mission would have been for nothing, and everyone who died would have been in vain. To be safe, they send the radar to the face via a rover. They transmit the radio wave bearing the correct answer to the DNA riddle. A white doorway opens up in the face. Jim, Terry, and Luke decide to go to the face, and they tell Phil to fix the return journey module and leave when he's done, whether they are back or not. Jim, Terry, and Luke enter through the doorway of the face, and it closes behind them, breaking radio contact with Phil. They realize the atmosphere inside is breathable air, and they take off their helmet. They enter into a 3D model of the solar system. The solar system shows Mars as a blue and green planet. It's telling a story. People used to live on Mars, but a meteor hit the planet, destroying it. A slender red being appears from behind Luke, Terry, and Jim and continues to show them the story. The population of Mars left in spaceships to go live in different galaxies, but one of the ships was left behind, and DNA information was uploaded into it by the Martians. It was this ship that came to Earth and brought the first single-cell organisms with it. Those organisms eventually grew over millions of years into modern-day humans. Life on Earth actually came from Mars. The face on Mars was placed there so that one day people from Earth can come back and learn where they came from. Radio contact with Phil is reestablished, and he tells them a storm is brewing and they need to return to the module so they can go back home. Jim realizes that the face is actually a ship, and a countdown has begun for its takeoff. Terry and Luke begin to leave, but Jim says he will be staying here. He says that all of this was an invitation for them to go meet their Martian ancestors, and he will be going. It's what he was born to do. Terry and Luke agree to let Jim go. Terry and Luke get out and barely make it to the return journey module in time as Phil is just about to leave. Meanwhile, Jim is lifted into a small ship where he is placed in a compartment. Water begins to rise in the compartment, and Jim gets worried. He holds his breath, but as the water rises all the way up, he realizes he can somehow breathe in it. He has flashbacks of his entire life with his friends and his wife Maggie as he is excited for the journey to a new world. As Terry, Phil, and Luke are leaving the Mars atmosphere in the return journey module, they notice Jim's ship fly by, taking him to another galaxy. Luke looks at the ship leaving into deep space and wishes Jim good luck, knowing that his friend is finally doing what he was destined to do. The end.